This is the 5th part of this manhwa. If you haven't seen the previous chapters, I recommend that you do. Fusion, Shaehyun shouts as Dong watches attentively, swearing that he will defeat him. But he feels a hand on his arm. It's Y, the protagonist, who tells him that Halo needed him to save his secret technique for the next battle. So he steps aside and says he will handle the situation. Dong asks if he can do it, and Y nods. The protagonist closes his eyes and concentrates to communicate with his light beast. He confesses to Xiao Jin that he has run out of magic and asks for help if Xiao Jin can still hear him. Suddenly, the protagonist's body begins to glow and levitate a few meters off the ground, surrounded by white rays that identified as flashes of light. Xiao Jin then appears on the platform, roaring and showing his gigantic new developed form of a light dragon. Shaehyun, the king's son, is surprised to see it and praises it. His eagle has been reduced by half compared to Y's soul beast. Swirling Kai winds sweep across the platform as the light dragon approaches the eagle. Astonished, the prince protector leader does not give orders to his soul beast, which is caught by the claws of the immense light dragon and, without the need to show any magic-related power, crushes the bird, instantly incapacitating it. Finally, he throws it against its master, and he is thrown out of the battle platform along with it. So the tournament announcer gives his final verdict, victory for Halo. Y feels the power in the air and the satisfaction of having won the duel, but he can't resist standing and ends up lying on the ground. Suddenly, at night, the boy opens his eyes only to realize that he is in a bed and it's a familiar one. It's his own bed, which means he is in his cabin room, where all of Halo was staying. Dong appears in the room and informs him that he has been unconscious for an entire day. Y holds his head and complains about the pain he feels, but instantly remembers that they are supposed to face the Wind Dragon team the next day. He then asks about the condition of his teammates. Dong informs him that Kim and Sean are not in a condition to participate after how they ended the last encounter, so it will be just the two of them and Swiss Malik if he recovers, as he is not in the best condition either. Dong opines that even if the latter joins the battle, they won't be strong enough to win the duel. After this conversation, Master Lai Ki-wen enters the room and receives an apology from Y, who considers himself to have failed. But instead, the dean congratulates him, saying that he has done an excellent job and has led the group in the best way possible. He also tells him that if they lose tomorrow, there will be no problem, as he already sees him as a winner after the strength he showed. He even gives him the option to surrender as well. Y is determined to participate in the fight anyway and vows to do so, even if it's just him and Dong. Then the master invites him to continue resting to be in the best shape. The next day, the teams were present on the platform, and it was time to fight. Y admits that his magic had not fully recovered, only about 70%, and as he observed the opponent, he appeared very strong. The fight begins. The Wind Dragon team was complete, while on Halo's side, there were only Dong, Y, and the Swiss. Y takes the initiative, immediately pulling out his sacred staff of light and holding it high in the air as he begins to gather the energies of the spirits of light. On the other side, one of the opponents felt a bit curious about Y's magic. Y then turns to his teammate Dong and tells him to prepare his bow and arrow. It was time to use them. The white-haired boy nods, although he had doubts about whether it was the best they could do. The joint attack begins. Y asks the light elemental spirits he summons to attack his enemy, but the opponent was ready to counter it. With his sword, he uses the ability of Spatial Rift Crossbar to create an X on the platform that automatically absorbs the light flames. Y notices that his attack is absorbed, so he uses a wave of light that emanates from a movement of his arm. The rival seems prepared again, and with his dragon sword, he counters Y's second light attack, causing the platform to be covered by a waterfall of water that formed due to the clash of elements. It was the right moment, and Dong understood it. He took out his bow and arrow. Then, he took aim and fired 5 arrows that hit the waterfall surrounding their opponent, and managed to injure him. However, the Wind Dragon team participant managed to stand up and tells them not to rejoice yet because he wasn't giving up. Now he confesses that the rest of his team had been knocked down by the combo his teammates executed, but not him. He removes an arrow that was lodged in his chest. Y is surprised and admits that he didn't expect the guy to get back on his feet so quickly after the combo. Now the rival expresses admiration for the protagonist's way of fighting and also says that he would surrender if his father's honor were not at stake. He was the son of the Duke. Y exhales tiredly but shouts at the rival that he would make him surrender. Y tells his teammates that he has made a superhuman effort to stay on his feet, and has almost completely depleted his magic. Therefore, Dong and Swiss Malik tell him to step aside, as they will continue the duel. Now the two of them charge towards the Duke's son. Dong unsheathes his bow and loads an arrow ready to execute his opponent, But the Duke's son is not surprised by this. In fact, he finds the repetition of the attack foolish. The arrow is fired, and the Duke's son stops it with his dragon sword, which shatters the arrow into dozens of pieces. This doesn't prevent him from congratulating his opponent and recognizing him as the best archer he has ever seen in his life. He also acknowledges that it is very difficult for him to dodge Dong's arrows. Finally, he adds that he would like him to join his team and will inform him when there is a spot in a secondary troop. This annoys Dong, who, despite hearing the proposal, tells him that he will never join him. He then attacks, this time with a saber in his hands. Y tells Swiss Malik to support Dong, so he unsheathes a sword and joins the fight. But even though it's 2 against 1, the Duke's son doesn't seem to be fazed and manages to withstand their attacks. Now he asks Y to summon his light beast, as he can only win with it. However, the protagonist refrains from doing so and remains silent. Then Swiss Malik attacks the rival and asks him to stop underestimating him, as he only talks to the protagonist when the other two are fighting with him now. The Duke's son asks them to surrender while continuing to resist the attacks of Malik and Dong Rai, but he lets his guard down for a moment, and the latter two launch a joint attack. Malik locks his sword with the Duke's son's and Dong releases his and jumps onto the rival's back, aiming an arrow directly at his head, and asks him to surrender or he will release it. But this was a mistake. The moment Dong hears him behind him, the swordsman summons a leopard, his soul beast. Then he uses the technique of the wild thunder leopard, and the sword multiplies its power, generating friction between the weapons that ends with an explosion on the platform. From a distance, the Dean and the Duke, who are watching from a VIP area, are surprised by what is happening. As the smoke from the explosion disperses, we see Dong Rai and Swiss Malik sprawled on the platform, lying next to the protagonist, who is standing with his staff of light. They are out of the fight. The Duke's son tells our protagonist that he regrets having to use such a powerful attack, but Dong Rai's arrow had left him with no other options. He then asks Y to surrender. Y gets annoyed and tells him that he has no intention of surrendering. He raises his staff high into the air and this time makes a plea to the gods of creation, asking them to grant him infinite power. The Duke's son is alarmed and doesn't understand how Y still has so much power. He was in a tough spot. However, the technique is not completed. Behind Y appears his current master, Lai Ki-wen. He punches the boy in the head, and Y immediately falls unconscious on the ground. His current master lifts him in his arms and, before taking him off the platform, explains that he made this decision because his apprentice was willing to use his life force to win the battle, and that was very foolish. He also tells the Duke's son that he will apologize to his father afterward. After delivering his message, he admits Halo's surrender, and this way, the tournament ends for their group. Some time later, the protagonist wakes up once again in a bed with a severe headache from his master's punch. His brown-haired companion hears him complaining about the pain and quickly comes to the room, asking how he's feeling. He then tells Y that they are in Zyuda's palace and that some things have happened. One of them is that the king had watched their fights and granted permission for them to recover from their injuries in his palace. Another is that Duke Filch did not embarrass the dean and accepted his apologies graciously, leaving any hard feelings behind. The light mage laments because he understands that he still has much to learn and feels ashamed. But his companion reassures him, saying that he doesn't have to worry about anything because he has earned the respect of their entire team. And from that day on, they will follow him wherever he goes. Later, we see Y having lunch and devouring everything in front of his eyes. The dean appears next to him and tells him that he should eat less since he is still a bit weak. When he notices his presence, Y stops and takes the opportunity to apologize for his last performance. His superior replies that he should not feel dissatisfied as he did very well, but he emphasizes that he should not use his life force lightly as it is very dangerous. After this, he comments that if the fight had been on equal terms, they would have won it with absolute certainty and very easily. But from this failure, they should learn what needs improvement. So he sends him to fill his belly and invites him to keep improving day by day. After a few days had passed, and the members of the Halo group had fully recovered, Lai Ki-wen took them to meet the king. The king seemed to admire the group and even asked them if they wanted to stay and work for him since they were young and still had a lot to learn. The invitation was declined by the group, and then the king kindly recommended that they go on a learning journey and return in the future to join his ranks. Days later, the 5 members of the Halo group returned to their cabin, where they felt more free, and they began training physically and mentally once again. This is how the next 3 months passed. The day to say goodbye came again, and this time Y had to bid farewell to his master Lai Ki-wen and his teammates. We see him having a conversation with the dean, thanking him for his time, teachings, and guidance throughout this time. Lai Qiwen tells him that it hurts to let him go because he feels like his own student. Wei confesses that he also feels like a student of his and that he will surely return to greet him in the future. Now his teacher tells him to go say goodbye to his teammates even though they may feel bad about his departure. But the teammates greet him with a cold "have a safe journey." Before saying goodbye to Ziyuda, Wei decides to visit the prince, who tells him that they can now be friends because of how strong the boy is. Wei feels honored to be able to be his friend. Shanyu then asks if he happens to have an older brother, and the Knight of Light responds not with a simple yes, but with the attitude of grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him, asking if he has any information about his brother. He then tells him that he has a mission in the kingdom of Ziyuda, and Shanyu wonders why his brother can't come to visit the family. He asks where his brother is. The protagonist replies that he is safe and promised not to reveal his location because he is still dealing with his past, and surely when he recovers, he will come to visit. To conclude the conversation, the Knight of Light tells the boy that the king is frail as he is aging, and the Light Mage suggests that for now, he should not inform the king about his other son. He asks for a year's time and promises to return with Jan to the kingdom for the family reunion. Shanyu responds that he has earned his family's trust and gratitude, giving him a green medal. This is the second medal of the battalion's authority, something that would help him greatly during his journey. After the conversation with the king's son, Wei passes by the school's wooden cabin and notices Miss Hao Lun in one of the rooms. He enters the room to talk to her and apologizes for what happened last time. He then advises her that if she likes Dongrai, she should be more careful with him and get to know his character better to avoid hurting him. Hao Lun gets angry with the protagonist for being meddlesome and leaves the place, although moments later, in her head, she acknowledges that he's right and promises to change. The next morning, our protagonist says goodbye to the dean and promises to visit him again in the future. As he walks, he realizes that he hasn't seen any of his Halo teammates that morning, but he understands that each of them has their path, and that's how their lives are. They come together, they separate. But there's always a next time. His thought is interrupted when he sees the sign of the Mercenaries Guild. He decides to enter for a moment before continuing his journey. Inside the Mercenaries Guild, the old leader whom he had encountered before in the forest on his way to the kingdom of Ziyuda awaits him. He gets excited to see the boy and tells him he thought he was dead after the encounter with the wrongdoers. The protagonist replies that he simply hadn't had time to come back to say hello. His mercenary friend says there's no problem and invites him for a drink, but the protagonist must decline as he needs to continue the mission entrusted to him by his master Leolun some time ago. The mercenary now shows a strong interest in accompanying him as he admires him, but Wei warns that it will be a tough journey, and although the mercenary is not afraid, Wei doesn't want him on his trip. However, he seeks another solution. He takes out a piece of paper and writes a letter of recommendation so the mercenary can enter the Earth Knights Academy and train with Lai Qiwen. Very excited, the mercenary takes the note and says that it's his favorite academy, and it's a dream come true for him to be able to enter. The protagonist then leaves, telling him they will meet again in 3 years. When he leaves the guild, he is surprised to find Kim, Sean, Dong, and Malik waiting for him with the news that they would join him on the mission entrusted by his master. Lai Qiwen had allowed it, so now they would go together in search of that legendary artifact. Swiss Malik says they had decided to change the group's name to Halo of Mercenaries. The protagonist is very pleased with his companion's decision, and the 5 of them begin their journey together. Wei suggests returning to his brother Jan's village before going after their main objective. He needs to inform Janhu that he has successfully completed the mission. Upon arriving at the thieves' village, someone greets him at the entrance and asks for money and belongings. Wei convinces him to reconsider until he recognizes him as the second leader of the family and invites him inside. The group is surprised by the treatment the protagonist receives. Then, they all enter the village, and there was Janhu, who tightly embraces our light mage and tells him that he is amazed by his return. After chatting about various things and catching up with his older brother, night falls, and all the characters go to sleep. While they are in the land of dreams, Wei and Janhu take the opportunity to leave the house and sit under the moon to have a deep conversation about everything that has happened so far. Specifically, Janhu was very happy when he heard that his older brother had become a Knight of Light. After this, Wei tells Janhu that everyone misses him in the kingdom of Ziyuda, and it would be good for him to return there. He also adds that for the time being, their father, the king, doesn't know his whereabouts, but only for the time being. This stirs up Janhu's emotions a bit, and he says he thinks it's time to return to Ziyuda because he can't let an elderly man worry about his son. Therefore, he decides to return but not before helping his younger brother fulfill the mission entrusted to him by Leolun. Wai is surprised to hear this and is also happy about his brother Zhanhu's decision. The latter tells him that he didn't plan to let him go alone because he definitely knows it's a very dangerous journey, and he wouldn't feel safe if Wai left without his company. The light mage is moved by the bandits' decision. The next day, the group sets off on their journey to find Leyland's legendary sword. Now, we have a jump of 2 months where they continue their journey without any problems. Finally, they reach the border with the country Dalu. Wai consults the map upon arrival and notices that the Kenexing district is still more than 76 miles away from their current location. Therefore, they will continue their journey, and now they must pass through the city of Manhwa, a city that was the leader in the markets and much more advanced than the others the protagonist had seen so far. After walking for a while in Manhwa, the group decides to stop at an inn to rest and regain their strength. The chosen inn is quite elegant inside. Here, the protagonist takes out the map he had consulted earlier and shares it with the rest, indicating that there are still 76 miles to go to Kenexing. He then tells them that Master Leyland Dai confessed that the sword they were looking for is somewhere near the last mentioned area. The map shows valleys and forests in the area, so they should search every corner of that biome. After finishing presenting his information, he asks the rest if anyone has any questions or something to add. Zhanhu adds that they should have a smaller, detailed map specifically of the Kenexing area, which would be very helpful. Wai agrees with the idea and then asks Dongrai to accompany him to buy the map so they can later investigate it at the inn and draw conclusions. The protagonist and his archer friend arrive at the map shop, where they are greeted by an enthusiastic vendor. He tells them they are in the right place if they are looking for maps and informs them about all the products they have for sale, including a map of the Western continent, which catches the protagonist's attention. He immediately asks to see it. The vendor agrees and tells him that it's a map that has been passed down through generations in his family. Wai examines it closely and can tell that it is very old, so there may be changes today. Then his mind drifts a bit, and he sees a young girl with lilac hair blushing on the surface of the paper, and Wai wonders if she is still there. Dongrai enters the scene, interrupting the pleasant vision of the light lake, asking why he was looking at a map of the West. The protagonist comes to his senses and leaves the map. Wai approaches the vendor and tells him that he will buy the map of Kenexing, but that he will also keep the one of the West. The vendor nods, takes the payment, and finally bids them farewell, grateful. As they return to the inn with the rest of the Halo mercenaries group, the protagonist asks his friend if he plans to continue ignoring the girl from Hongsu. The white-haired friend indicates that their relationship was impossible because she and her family belonged to royalty, and he was just a nobody in comparison to her. Wai tells him that he shouldn't underestimate himself because he is a great guy. Dongrai admits that he likes the girl, and the light mage tells him that he should make an effort to improve their relationship because she also cares for him. Then he tells him not to worry because when he returns to where he belongs, Professor Lai Qiwen will surely lend a hand with the relationship. Without allowing them to say anything else, he says it's time to return to the inn. Later on, the Halo mercenaries arrive at the place they were supposed to be, the district of Kenexing. The first area they were exploring was the Longjin Forest. Wai is happy to be within Kenexing's boundaries and shares this milestone with his brother, Zhanhu. Zhanhu tells him that if they continue walking straight, they will soon reach the heart of the forest. But something is not right. Zhanhu warns that there's something ahead indicating danger and unsheathes his sword, urging them to be careful. Wai obeys and takes out his staff to form a protective circle around them. Finally, he uses it to call upon the spirits of light to reveal all evil in front of their eyes. The spirits obey and assist the group by aggressively rushing forward and creating an explosion in front of their eyes among the trees, clearing their view. Once the explosion dissipates, an elderly voice comes from somewhere, informing the group that they have just entered a sacred territory, and it's time for them to leave. This was the only warning they would receive, and otherwise, they would be trapped in that place until the end of time. Wai seemed to understand the threat and didn't want any trouble, so he retreats. However, despite the warnings, it's Dongrai who advances. He bows courteously to greet the attackers and then asks a question. Dongrai wanted to know if the attackers were elves. After hearing this, the voice that had spoken earlier confirms that they are indeed elves, telling Dongrai not to feel superior for knowing who they are. Now, he threatens them again, saying that he will give them one last chance to leave the forest unharmed. Dongrai pleads with him not to attack and confesses loudly that he too is a half-elf. After the words of the group's archer and a moment of silence, an old man emerges from nearby bushes, with a long white beard similar to Leyland's. He wore a white and blue robe with what looked like 4 wings extending from his back. This man approaches Dongrai and scrutinizes him from head to toe, apparently looking for something. After an awkward moment, he asks the boy, denigrating his appearance, if he could really be an elf with that look. Without letting him respond to that, he tells him that he is nothing more than a human who has partially transformed into an elf. He also scolds him for leading a group of humans directly into this forest, which was specifically an elf forest. But Dongrai no longer feels in a position to respond to the elderly elf, as he had offended and hurt him with his words. So, it's Wai who appears to defend his friend, shouting angrily at the old man that he shouldn't discriminate against Dong for being a half-elf, as everyone has their circumstances in life. The elderly elf, meanwhile, remains silent, waiting for the protagonist to finish speaking before making his response. The boy goes on to ask ironically if he had bought the forest or who he thought he was to obstruct their path. Was he hiding something? The old elf tires of listening to the young light mage and immediately takes his staff, rising a few meters off the ground and shouting for them to leave while launching a super powerful lightning attack. Fortunately, Wai manages to dodge it. After recovering, Wai says that it wasn't good manners to attack without warning. It sounded like betrayal. The old man says it was accidental because his hand had slipped. But after this, he intentionally attacks again just as he did the first time, despite denying it. This time, the protagonist is fully prepared to avoid the attack, not by jumping backward, but by using his defensive light magic. He generates a force field that covers both him and Dongrai from the elf's powerful magic. Once the attack is over, the old elf stares piercingly at Wai, who tells him to stop attacking and calls him an old man. This displeases the elderly elf, who admits the boy's power and says he now understands why he was so arrogant. He then adds that, being so powerful, he would become a problem, but he would eradicate him anyway. Both face each other to start a new fight, but they are interrupted. Swiss Malik appears on the battlefield and advances toward the elderly elf. His plan is not to attack, but taking advantage of his characteristic calmness, he approaches the older man. Afterward, he politely informs him that they are the Halo mercenary clan, and that they have come to this place just to look for an object, as they have no ill will. He then asks if the old man could please tell them where they were. The elderly elf looks at him for a moment and, abandoning his combat position, agrees to have a fluid and respectful conversation with the Swiss man. This surprises Wai, who doesn't understand how Malik can always reason with people so effortlessly. Swiss Malik confesses that they are in the forest in search of an object. The old elf smiles and says that they should have announced their intentions earlier, implying that they could have avoided the unpleasant situation. The protagonist interrupts Malik's polite conversation and tells the elderly elf that they were actually looking for the sacred sword and asks if he could guide them to it. The elf floats closer to him and tells him that many years have passed, and thousands of men have tried to locate the legendary sacred sword, but none have succeeded in their quest. So, what made the boy think he would be successful? Wai seems to ignore the words of the elderly elf and asks again if he knows where the sword is or not, but he only receives a blow to his head as a reward. However, it seems that the elf only wanted to vent his frustration on Wai, as he then tells him with a laugh that he knows the exact location of the sword, but that if Wai wants to obtain it, he will have to help him with something first. Wai, without beating around the bush, asks the elderly elf what kind of help he needs. So now is when things get serious, and the elderly elf completely changes his attitude. He makes his oath. He swears by the name of the natural elder elves that if the humans can defeat the dark elves in his name, he promises to reveal the exact location of the sacred sword that the Halo mercenaries group is searching for. In case he doesn't, he offers his body and life to the punishment of the gods. Wai listens carefully to the oath and, seeing that the elderly elf has finished reciting his words, accepts what he heard and asks what's happening with the dark elves. Then the elderly elf begins the explanation. Natural elves and dark elves had always been enemies by nature. Both sides were also always balanced and equal in terms of power, but something unusual had happened recently. It turns out that the balance had been broken because the dark elves had managed to surpass the natural elves in power. Since then, they had been overwhelmed by them, attack after attack, and always being overpowered. If this continued, there was a huge risk that the faction of natural elves would cease to exist. So, he had gone to seek help from an old friend when he coincidentally ran into them, the Halo mercenaries group. At that very moment, but elsewhere in the forest, a dark elf mercilessly attacked a natural elf. As he charged his energy ball to annihilate his opponent, he mocked him, saying that he was very weak. The natural elf wondered when they had become so powerful, and whether the gods desired their extinction. Now, the dark elf threatens them, saying that with his next power, they would kneel before him. The natural elf calls upon his ancestors to defend him, while in the dark elf, he summons all the power possible to destroy him. Both attacks collide, leading to a biblical-sized explosion. But the dark power is much stronger and begins to consume the power of the natural elf. The latter says he won't be able to hold on much longer and begins to yield. But just at this moment, a voice is heard, invoking the elements of light and begging them to shed light on where they were, illuminating the battlefield. Then a tremendous ray of light is summoned and goes directly toward the dark attack with which the evil elf was about to finish off the good ones. The dark elf king is surprised by what had just happened and wonders who dares to interrupt elf fights. Why, smiling confidently, tells him that his question is very foolish and introduces himself as a human. He then tells him that if he interferes, it's because he has a reason, and he invites him to live in peace with the other faction of elves since the forest was big enough for both. The Dark Elf King declines the protagonist's invitation and then tells him that if he knows what's good for him, he will leave the forest right now. Y smiles again and, hitting the nail on the head with his words, asks the Dark Elf if he really thought he could take over the forest with power that didn't belong to him. This leaves the Dark Elf stunned, as he didn't know how Y had found out about that. But anyway, he orders his army to prepare for the attack. Y gives him another chance to reach peace through words, but seeing that it has no effect, he begins to gather the power of the elements of light to perform a level 8 magic ability, which is also destructive if used against the Dark Elves. The illumination that the protagonist had achieved on the battlefield boosted the powers of the natural elves and reduced those of the Dark Elves. So, feeling so weakened and overwhelmed, the Dark Elf King orders his armies to retreat, promising that they would meet again later. Once the Dark Army retreats, the elderly elf shakes the protagonist's hand, saying that if it weren't for him, they wouldn't have survived the attacks of their enemies. The protagonist modestly says he's had a bit of luck since the opponent chose to withdraw. Otherwise, they would have had to fight, and the light mage couldn't use the same magical attack twice in a row as it consumed too much energy. When the protagonist and the group were about to leave, the elderly natural elf stops him, asking for one more favor, which is to try to revive the natural elf king since he had been severely injured in the last battle. And despite trying various ways to revive him, nothing had worked. Y agrees to try. Upon arriving at the place where the king's battered body lay, the protagonist once again calls upon his spirit friends of light, but this time not to defend or attack, but to use their light to heal the elf's life force. After completing his healing magic, the king stops agonizing, and he looks much better than moments before. Y explains that they should leave him lying down for a while longer to fully recover. Everyone praises and thanks him repeatedly, so the elderly natural elf wonders what they could do for the Halo mercenaries group as a gesture of gratitude. So, without much embarrassment, the protagonist asks for a feast of food, something that the elves don't mind carrying out. After a while, the table is filled with delicious food and drinks that the group enjoys very much. By the time they had finished eating, the king was feeling better and summons them to his hall. From his throne, he formally thanks Y for everything he and his group had done and tells him that if it weren't for that, they could be dead at this moment. Y tells him not to worry and that they are here to help each other. Nevertheless, the king says he doesn't feel satisfied with the gratitude they had given him so far. The king now agrees to provide secret information about the object the group was searching for. He tells them that the sacred sword was a weapon left in the world by the ancient elf king. It possessed the power to destroy the planet. Legend had it that the sword could only be found in the Divine Forest, a forest that only natural elves could enter and were aware of its existence. Even if someone accidentally stumbled upon that forest, they couldn't enter due to the protective barrier of light surrounding it. Janhu tells his younger brother that the information is accurate, and they should head to that divine forest. He then asks the elderly elf if he can guide them to the place. However, the elf refuses, saying that he cannot accompany them, and they must find it on their own after searching for it. Still, he can provide them with an approximate location. So, the protagonist's older brother says it's time to leave. Before leaving, the elf king informs the group that the dark elves had temporarily left but would return to help them in their next battle. Y then presents them with a book he had written himself about light magic, so they can learn and prepare for the fight. Now, the group continues on their way to find the sacred sword. After an extensive walk and a thorough search in the area indicated by the elderly elf, the group failed to locate the divine sword and began to feel discouraged. The protagonist was frustrated and deeply concerned. He couldn't return to Leolun without completing the mission. His half-elf, half-human friend asks him not to give up just yet. Still, seeing how disappointed his friend appeared, he tells him that if they were to give up, Y should explain the truth to Leolun calmly and honestly. That was the way to resolve things. So, they all go to sleep now, and Y closes his eyes with that phrase in mind. In the middle of the night, the protagonist wakes up to a voice speaking to him. It was the voice of the barrier mentioned by the elderly elf earlier. The barrier asks him why he has awakened it from its slumber, and the boy responds that he simply wants to find the divine sword. The barrier tells him that it wouldn't like to reveal its location because it's a very dangerous place, and they might even end up dead. But seeing that the protagonist is determined to find it, the barrier indicates that it will let them pass, but that they will face 3 very difficult trials. Y gets up and rushes to where his companions were sleeping, waking them up and telling them that they can now search for the divine sword because the barrier has allowed them to do so. Now, all of them together pass through that previously impassable crystal ball. However, upon entering, they encounter the first danger. 2 stone giants appear before them. Y suggests they should form their group as follows, and his companions obey him. Swiss Malik and Janhu in the front line, leading the way. In the middle, it's Y himself alongside Dong Rai, and guarding the rear, Sean and Kim. The strategy starts to fail when the 2 in front couldn't get rid of the stone giants. Therefore, the protagonist instantly decides to summon his light beast, Xiaojin. When the light dragon appears, it spews a beam of its element to disintegrate the stone giants. However, the group is surprised as the enemies are invulnerable to the protagonist's light beast. Y feels guilty for pushing the group to enter the barrier when it had warned them they could die inside. He suggests fleeing the scene to preserve their lives. But Dong Rai doesn't want to run away. Instead, he encourages them to attack together, and if they fall, they'll fall together. Sean also supports what the archer says, causing the protagonist to change his mind. However, when he turns around, he sees that his older brother is injured and cannot continue the fight. Next, it's Swiss Malik who, after attacking the giants in close combat, also gets injured and fails to harm the giants. This is when the light mage makes the decision to ask for unlimited power from the light elements. Y levitates above the ground, gathering all the power of the light elements. Afterward, his magical pet descends from the sky to support him, and together they create an explosion that incapacitates one of the enemies who until a moment ago seemed invincible. Taking advantage of the distance from the other golems, Y invites the group to climb onto his dragon's back and move away from the area since they couldn't defeat them all. Once they are far enough away, they descend in the forest, light a campfire, laugh, and chat, feeling safe. Y tells Janhu that they should leave him alone and go back. But the older brother doesn't take it well since they were halfway there, and they had faced many challenges together. He didn't consider it time to give up. Then Swiss Malik and Sean express their desire to continue forward and encourage the others to share the same opinion. Our protagonist expresses his gratitude with a smile, happy to receive the support of his companions and know that he can count on them until the end. Now, Janhu says it's time to plan their next steps since they didn't know what they might encounter. After wandering through the divine forest for 3 days, they come across a symbol on the ground overflowing with magical power. It appeared to be an ancient seal with mysterious powers. No one knew what to do, so the protagonist remembers that he has a magical book that may contain information about a certain seal. Then he tells everyone to rest while he studies to figure out what to do next. And that's how the 5th part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word light in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.